In here, finished my walk. You can see behind me this little lake. There's several of them in our community. And by the way, I saw a guy pull a nice big bass out of one of these lakes the other day, so I might have to check that out. Anyway, it's a beautiful morning. It's cool today, and just thought I'd check in with you and say hi. So yesterday at our staff meeting, we were looking at Psalm 13, and we had a really good discussion around that, and I thought, well, I think I'll share that with the folks tomorrow. But three things happened to change my mind. The first is this. During our staff meeting, Sandy Ram said that she'd heard a quote from Michael Buble, you know, that great theological mind, Michael Buble. And he said that generosity is the most selfish thing you can do because it makes you feel so good. I thought that was really a wonderful statement. And then that afternoon, Sherry was watching HGTV, and one of these shows with the Property Brothers, you know, Drew and what's his name, Scott, they have a show where they are taking a celebrity, and then that celebrity is being generous to someone in their life. And in this case, it was Michael Buble. And he used that same quote from his grandfather. And Michael Buble had a caregiver for his grandfather, a wonderful woman who had served their family for many, many years. And he was completely redoing and remodeling their family household to give to her as a gift. So that really stuck in my mind about generosity. And then a couple of days ago, I was listening to a North Point Church sermon, Andy Stanley, and he had as a guest Jeff Foxworthy, who's a fabulous comedian, as most of you know, and a very wonderful Christ follower. And their talk was about generosity. So when I hear three things in a row about the same subject, I think that's God speaking to me, and he's saying, pay attention to this, three times, you know. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Now, because I'm going to talk about generosity, don't push the stop button, okay? Now, I see you. Don't push the stop button. Don't pause it. You need to listen, because at the end of this talk is a wonderful story. So in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, we studied 2 Corinthians, as you know, for quite a few weeks. Paul explains about generosity from the early first century Mediterranean Rim situation. So all the churches that Paul planted were around the Mediterranean Rim, and one of them was in Corinth. And several of the churches in Macedonia, these Greek churches, Corinth, Ephesus, these are all Greek churches, were really struggling financially because Christians were being boycotted and they couldn't leverage anything to make a living, and they were just living together. It was just kind of a really difficult time for Christ followers. But the church that was hurting the most was the church in Jerusalem. Now, James, the brother of Jesus, was the head of the churches in Jerusalem, and Paul talked about how that the church in Jerusalem was really suffering tremendously. They had no money, they had no jobs, they were poor beyond belief, they even had no money for food. And so Paul was asking the churches in Macedonia, specifically the Corinth church, to be generous towards them. And this is what Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Out of their extreme poverty, that's the church in Corinth, the churches in Macedonia, out of their extreme poverty, they gave generously. First of all, they gave themselves to the Lord, and then they gave generously to the church in Jerusalem. Man, most of you that are listening today have never experienced that kind of extreme poverty. But even in the midst of that, they were generous because they first gave themselves to the Lord. I heard this wonderful story from Jeff Foxworthy. For about 10 years, he's been working at the Atlanta Rescue Mission. And he goes down there and he leads a small group every Tuesday. And he's had a chance to lead many of these men to Christ. He's had a chance to help them recover from abuse in their younger lives that caused them to be homeless in all kinds of situations. But he just has this wonderful heart for these homeless men in Atlanta. And so last year, he decided that he wanted to be generous to these men. And so at Christmas, there was 250 men there. He was one of 10 small group leaders. And he went to the bank and got 250 crisp $50 bills. And he was going to bless each of these men with that. And and then of course, they could do with it whatever they wanted. They could buy gifts for their children. They could buy food, whatever they needed, they could do with that money. So on Christmas Day, Jeff Foxworthy and all the other men passed these $50 bills out. Everybody was giddy and happy and thrilled. And, oh, I'm going to buy my kids a present. I'm going to take my wife out to dinner. You know, they had all these different ideas. And then Jeff Foxworthy said, listen, I have one thought that you might consider in being generous with your money. Just down the road, there was a school that was burned, that had a fire, and the school was, children that didn't have money anyway. It was from a difficult part of Atlanta, downtown Atlanta, and so all these families were really hurting. They had no Christmas, they had no gifts, they had no food. And he said, if any of you would like to donate part of your money towards them, I will be sure and take that money. By the way, all the small group leaders will match your money. You know, if you give $100, we'll match it and give $200. But if you want to give a little bit of your money towards that, that'd be a wonderful thing. And then the rest of it you can spend with however you want. So he said, there's a bucket over here. Whatever you want to do, you can do. And then Jeff Foxworthy said that he was just blown away. One after one, 250 men, every single one of them, dropped their $50 bills in that bucket. And then some of them started fishing through their pockets, looking for more money to throw in. They went back to their rooms and looked for some change. And they just gave and they gave and they gave. And he said he has never felt more blessed to be around these people than he did on that morning. Now, you and I are middle-class Americans. We have more than we need. And I was just thinking of a way that we could be generous. We just received our check yesterday from the government. And Sherry and I, we don't really need that money. We're going to tithe on that money to the church, of course, but then we're going to take another tithe and give it away and be generous to somebody who is in need. And there's just so many ways that we can be generous. And I just want to encourage each and every one of you today to open your heart, to be generous, to do what you can to help someone who's in need during this very difficult time of the coronavirus. And the reason that you can be generous is because God has been generous to you. God bless you. Have a generous Wednesday, and we'll see you on Sunday.